Today we're going to talk about Django-REST framework and creating an API for a basic to-do application. The great thing about Django-REST framework is it is a Django-style framework on top of Django. And when I say that, I mean that you deal with models, so you deal with your data, you deal with views to interact with your requests, and then you also have a URL that you need to send all of your requests to. So to just jump right in here, we're going to start by installing Django-REST framework. And then we're going to create an API app since we're going to do all of our code inside of the API app. And then we're going to follow that up with adding REST framework and API to our settings file so that we can actually jump in and get started. So let's get the easiest part out of the way and let's look at our URLs. If you look in our main URLs file, we're including our API URLs. And then now let's look at our API URLs, and we're going to use api.views, and then these are our two URLs that we're going to use. Tasks / is going to give us a list of all of our tasks, and then if you look at the second URL, tasks / pk or some number is going to be the primary key of our task, and it's going to return the details of that task. So it's going to return a single instance of the task. And at this point we've done absolutely nothing new from what we normally do building our Django application. Now it's time to build our serializer. A serializer is a piece of functionality. It's a class that you inherit from to serialize or change all of your data into some format that Django-REST framework uses, usually JSON or XML. By default, it's JSON. Creating a serializer is actually quite simple. It's very similar to forms in that it has its own fields that you can use. So if you're not going to save anything to the database and you just want to manipulate data, or you can use a model with your serializer. With that, let's go ahead and take a look at our model. And in this case, we have completed title and description, and it's a very basic model that we use every day. So let's go ahead and create our first serializer in API serializers.py. And it's actually quite simple. We start out by doing a few imports. And the main import is of serializers from REST framework and our task model. So where we declare our class, we're going to name it task serializer. And we're going to inherit from serializers.modelSerializer. And then we're going to create a meta class and assign the model of task. If you'll notice, this is still very similar to, say, model forms. Similar ideas, and not necessarily functionality, but construction of your objects. And then what we want to do is we want to declare what fields that we want to use with this serializer from our model. And in this case, we're going to do the title, description, and completed. And with that, our serializer is done, and Django-REST framework takes care of the rest. To get a good example of how to actually use a serializer, we're actually going to jump over and work on our view next, and you'll get a good idea of how to use a serializer. Again, it's similar in idea with a form and has a lot of magic with it, quote-unquote magic, like the form to do the data transformation that needs to be done. Now we're actually getting to the meat of our API, dealing with views. This is going to be fairly familiar because we're going to be dealing with requests and returning responses. In this case, we're going to be using more REST framework objects instead of Django specific objects, but it all does the same thing. I want you to pay attention that we're going to be dealing with different HTTP verbs, and we're also going to be dealing with data with our serializer as if it was a normal model object. Think model forms while we're dealing with our serializer. Because we're going to be familiar with a lot of the code and it's just a new way of typing it, we're actually going to move fairly quickly through the code. With that, let's go ahead and get started. To start, we're going to edit our API/views file, and then we're going to jump in with doing a bunch of imports. Don't actually worry about what they are because we'll see what they do when we get to them. First thing we're going to do in our views file is we're going to create our first function-based view of task list. It's going to take a request, and this task list is going to list all of our tasks or create a new task when we post to it or get to it. That being said, we're going to check if we're doing a get or a post. But the first thing we need to do is we need to use the API view decorator for this function-based view to tell Django-REST framework that this is going to either be a get or a post. If it's neither, then it's going to be rejected automatically, and django-rest-framework will take care of that for us. Jumping further into our code, we're going to do the first thing where we deal with our serializer. We're going to get all of our task objects, and then we're going to instantiate them inside of a task serializer. And then we're going to return a django-rest-framework based response and send it serializers.data. So what this is going to do is it's going to take the tasks.objects.all call where it gets all of our data, and it's going to convert all of that data to JSON in our instance. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create another instance of task serializer, and we're going to get our data from our request object inside of our post. Since this is based on a model, we're going to check if this is valid, similar to a form, and if it is, we're going to do serializer.save, and it's going to save to the database. Then from there, we just return another response, and we're going to return the data, and we're also going to return a status code. A status code of created is what we're going to return, and that return again is going to return JSON. If it isn't being created, then we're going to return what the errors are that occurred and a 400 bad request. So let's go ahead and step back for a second and take a look at what we've done. We've created a function-based view that's going to be routed to our API/tasks. That's going to return all of our tasks that we have in our database. However, if we post, and it's going to return it in JSON. However, if we do a post, or posting data, it's going to instantiate a new task serializer, and it's going to check if it passes all of our validation that's built into the model. If it does do that, then it's going to do a serializer.save, which saves that data to the database. And then it's going to return the data back along with a 201 created status code. However, if that post fails and there's some sort of validation error, it's going to return the errors along with a 400 bad request status code. Now let's go ahead and write our function-based view for dealing with a single task object. In this case, we're going to use get, put, and delete. These are the HTTP verbs that we're going to deal with. And this task detail function-based view is going to get a single task, update a single task, or it's going to delete a single task. We're going to start that by actually trying to get the task, and if it does not exist, then we're going to return a 404 status code. First thing we're going to do is check if our request is a GET request. If it is, then we're just going to return that task serialized in our response. If it's a put, we use put to update our task. We're going to check if it's valid data, and then we're going to save it to the database and again return as JSON the data that we have. If it's not valid, then we're going to return the errors along with a 400 bad request. And finally, if it's a delete verb, then we're just going to delete the task and return a 204 no content response. Very similar to what we did with task list, just with a different context of how we're dealing with it. With all that in mind, let's go ahead and do a demo of this working. With this demo, we're going to actually use curl against our API. So we're going to open up tmux and start our server so that we can go next to it and do our curls and see the actual execution against our API. First curl we're going to do is against API/tasks, and that's going to return an empty array. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a post so that we can try to post and create an object. And when we do that, we're going to pass it in a title equals hello world, a description, and then once we post it, we're going to get a response back of our object in JSON form. And if we'll curl our API tasks, we'll get our task back in a JSON array. And then next, if we'll update our object API/tasks/1 and give it our data, then we will be returned our data in the new format. And again, if we'll update it and actually set it to true, and we call it, we get back all of our data plus true. And finally, if we do a delete at /API/tasks, we get back our response of 204, and we have no data and when we call our tasks again. Last but certainly not least, I want to leave you with a little bit of homework with Django REST Framework. If you've been around me for any time or you've watched any of these videos, you probably know that I really like class-based views. Fortunately, Django REST Framework comes with class-based views to make your life a lot simpler. These views that we've actually done can be done in about 6 lines of code and cover the exact same ability and functionality as before. So I encourage you to check out the Django REST Framework, and you can get a link to that in the show notes, and actually convert these function-based views over to class-based views, because it'll actually slim up your code a lot and is a good experience to see how it all works. The great thing about the class-based views is not only are there generic class-based views for you to use, but they also have the mix-ins available for you to incorporate into your application if you want to choose to use class-based views as well. I stuck with function-based views for this example so that we could show you how to use serializers in your code and to know a more robust way of doing your views. Thank you for watching this video, and please join us for our next video where we're going to go over more of the Django REST framework. Have a good rest of the day.